Derek and his crew felt invincible as they approached Marcus Steele, a black pilot running a small charter business from a rural airstrip. To them, he was just an easy mark, a lone man, outnumbered, who they believed could be intimidated and used without resistance. They planned to hijack his plane, thinking it would be a simple job. What they didn't see was the soldier beneath the surface, a former Air Force pilot shaped by combat, with scars that told a story of resilience. As the crew moved in to take control, Derek waved dismissively toward Marcus, expecting him to fold under pressure. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to go down without a fight. He felt the adrenaline surge through his veins, the instinct to protect rising within him as Derek's men made their move. They hijacked the plane and left him for dead, thinking they had won. But Derek and his crew had made a grave mistake. Marcus was alive, fueled by a resolve like steel, and he was coming back for what was rightfully his. The morning sun shone over the smooth surface of the Cessna Citation as Marcus performed his usual pre-flight checks. The rhythmic sounds of the engines humming blended with the calm of the rural airstrip. Chloe Ramirez, his trusted mechanic and co-pilot, commended his habit of diligence, even teasing him for double-checking her work. Their banter was comfortable, a familiarity formed through years of teamwork. Flying meant freedom, though finances barely allowed them to stay afloat. Everything changed when he noticed the four men approaching, their confidence unsettling. Their leader, broad-shouldered with a cold stare and a scar marking his jaw, met Marcus's gaze with a nod that sent a shiver down his spine. Something was terribly off, a tension that hung in the air like the calm before a storm. "Got yourself a nice little setup here," Derek said casually, leaning forward from his seat, acting as if their presence was perfectly normal. Marcus forced back the rising unease and took a deep breath. "I'm just a pilot," he replied coolly. "There's no such thing as just a pilot," Derek countered, leaning in closer, his voice dripping with a disturbing friendliness. "We need someone reliable, who knows the skies, and you look like a man who could keep a secret." Marcus's heart raced. He needed to navigate this conversation with precision. "I'm licensed and operate within the boundaries of FAA regulations," he said firmly, attempting to assert some control. "What fun is that?" "Tell," one of Derek's men sneered. "Where's the thrill in that?" That achievement for Marcus as a pilot was hard-earned, and he wouldn't let them play games with it. "Guys like you don't get far messing with people like me," he shot back, the tension rising. "Funny, coming from a man who's just one man, flying alone," Derek replied, his hand tightening as it rested on the armrest of Marcus's seat. "I'm not intimidated by your threats," Marcus said, locking eyes with Derek, defining the invisible line in the sand. Then everything escalated. Tyrell lunged at him, shoving him against the cockpit panel. The world around Marcus began to shrink as adrenaline surged through him. He fought back with every instinct honed from years of flying combat missions. He wrestled free, elbowing Tyrell and instinctively reaching for the controls. The plane swung uneasily in the air. "Regain control. Stabilize." Chloe shouted from her position as she steadied herself against the cold metal frame. But control kept slipping further as Derek and Tyrell pressed in. Derek closed the distance, his voice now a low growl. "Change course." "No," Marcus asserted through gritted teeth. "Don't be stupid," Derek warned. "We're not asking. This plane will belong to us." In a calculated move, Marcus grabbed the stabilizer trim, adjusting their altitude as they struggled in the cockpit. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, every rough breath compounding the tension in that cramped space. At that moment, he was a pilot, not just to fly, but to survive at all costs. The Cessna abruptly banked left due to Tyrell's sudden movement, which forced Marcus's instincts into overdrive. The warning chimes pierced the cabin's tension, and Marcus's heart sank. Their intentions were clear now. They were hijacking his plane, but he wasn't about to allow it. He pushed against the men with everything he had. "Don't shoot!" Tyrell growled, his eyes widening as he realized they were losing control. But their arrogance had already turned the situation precarious. "Flight routine is filed," Marcus shouted. "You change that, and we all go down." The room felt electric as he struggled for dominance. Derek finally stepped back slightly, his body tense and cautious. "Fine," Derek conceded, his voice still dangerously low. "But the only way this ends is if you change course." "Consider what you're asking," Marcus replied, his mind racing through options. He could take them with him, draw them into a coordinated plan afterward, but first, he had to maneuver them both carefully and safely. The battle became increasingly fierce as Marcus pushed through the force pushing against him, clenching his jaw as he retained every ounce of control he could muster. The plane heaved, and in those moments, as he disengaged himself from the men surrounding him, he could almost see the path ahead, a way to reclaim his freedom. On the edge of a precipice, it was about adaptation, action, and making critical choices. He had to let them know he was in charge without showing desperation. They wouldn't take him down, which only fueled Marcus's resolve. He would rise up and pull himself together to regain control. He was steering into the unknown, but he would emerge from this battle on the other side, no matter the cost. As the struggle intensified, Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline rush through him like never before. The stakes had never been higher, and for a brief moment, all he could hear was the droning of the engines as the cabin flipped into chaos around him. In a haze of movement, he fought for everything he valued. The fight would prove costly, but Marcus Steele was determined to reclaim not just his plane, but his very identity as a pilot, and as a man who simply wouldn't back down. As the plane lurched, Marcus steeled himself for the showdown ahead. Every instinct kicked into gear. Soon enough, it would be a battle for the skies. But first, he needed to emerge from the cockpit alive. And then he would show Derek, and the world, just what happened when they crossed Marcus Steele. As the plane lurched, Marcus Steele wrestled for control, the weight of Derek's threat still heavy in the air. He could feel adrenaline coursing through his veins, igniting his instincts. It was no longer just about flying. It was about survival. The Cessna Citation was not just a machine to him. It was a vessel of freedom, a piece of his identity that he was determined to reclaim. "Get back!" he shouted as he fought to stabilize the aircraft, pushing against Tyrell's relentless grip. The cockpit became a battleground, the ground pushing up against them with force as the plane banked wildly. Every muscle in his body tensed as he estimated his options, calculating the risks at 30,000 feet. "Marcus, you need to," Chloe's voice cut through the chaos, but he could barely focus on her words. He felt the overwhelming presence of men behind him, closing in like wolves, eager to claim their prize. Determination ignited a fire inside him. Turbulence may have been a challenge he knew how to navigate, but this was a new kind of storm. With a sudden bounce, the plane felt as if it were free falling, and instinctively, Marcus tightened his grip on the yoke. "I've got control," he roared, his voice steady despite the chaos. He took a deep breath, grounding himself, tuning out the panic that threatened to bubble up. In a split second, he made his decision. He needed to draw on every ounce of training he'd ever received. A tactical maneuver. If he could get the plane to level off just right, he could maybe force a stall to buy him time to reposition himself. He pulled the yoke back suddenly. "Hang on," he shouted, thrusting the throttle forward and pushing the plane into an intentional dive. The plane dropped, and he could hear the crew shouting behind him, their panic rising as the cabin filled with jarring vibrations. This would be the moment he needed. Marcus had flown through enemy territory. He could do this. He quickly leveled off the plane just before it risked spinning out of control. The sudden burst of air pressure caused the men to momentarily stagger, their confidence faltering. Marcus seized the opportunity, pushing the yoke hard to the right, sending the plane into a swift bank, forcing Tyrell and Derek to brace themselves against the console. "Chloe, now!" he yelled, knowing they needed to retreat and regroup or risk everything in an overt confrontation. Chloe was on it, quickly diving for the emergency controls as she directed the automated systems to assist Marcus. Her instincts kicked in hard, and the two of them danced through their coordinated movements. In one swift motion, she disabled the rear hatch, opening it slightly to let in a rush of air, creating a distraction. As their momentum threw the men off balance, Marcus felt an opening, a mere moment, but it was enough. He lunged to the left, twisting in his seat to grab the emergency equipment, a heavy flashlight that lay discarded amid the chaos. With every ounce of his pent-up fury, he hurled it toward Tyrell, aiming for the man's unprotected knee. The dull thud echoed, and Tyrell yelped, clutching his leg as Marcus sprang from the confines of his seat. Derek's violent disposition shifted, a flash of disbelief crossing his features, and Marcus seized the moment. Summoning all his strength, he tackled Derek, driving him into the cockpit, where they crashed into the instruments, alarms blaring from the sudden impact. "Stop this!" Derek yelled, but Marcus's instincts kicked in. Drawing on the training he had honed over years of combat, he soon had Derek pinned against the control panel, struggling, but Marcus relentlessly pushed down, holding firm his grip. "Enough!" Marcus shouted, but it was a phrase that felt flimsy against the echoes of their fight. He could sense that if he hesitated, there would be no coming back. From the corner of his eye, he saw Chloe slipping to his side, her expression fierce and unyielding. She wasn't simply a passenger, she was his partner in this fight. "Get him off balance," she urged. With renewed determination, Marcus twisted Derek's arm, wrestling the weapon away from him. Blood surged with adrenaline as he turned the tables. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed Derek's gun aside, forcing the man to swing wildly. "Get the hell out of here!" Derek shouted to Tyrell, who was still struggling to compose himself, reacting in a flurry of movements from the crash. Chloe took advantage and launched herself toward the rear compartment to grab the emergency gear. The bullets whizzed through the air, sparks flying as the chaos continued to obliterate any sense of control. But Marcus, with every ounce of focus and anger, maneuvered within the confined space of the cockpit, forcing Derek back. "Tyrell!" Derek's voice pitched desperately, the tone shifting as if he were about to succumb to the reality that they were both outgunned and outmatched in their own game. "Let's end this," Marcus snarled, pushing back just hard enough so that Derek's surprise flared with uncertainty. With one powerful shove, he sent Derek sprawling onto the cockpit's floor, regaining precious seconds in their chaotic confrontation. But Tyrell was quick to recover, aiming to lunge again in retaliation. Marcus knew he could end the standoff, but the real fight was just beginning, and he needed to keep his crew alive. Feeling the tempo shift in his favor, he reached toward the emergency landing gear lever. With a swift pull, he activated it, unlocking a necessary diversion while sending a signal through to Chloe. "Now!" Marcus shouted, and she grasped the meaning with instinctual precision, snapping off the cabin lights and plunging the cockpit into a dim glow. "We have to move," Chloe urged. With renewed energy, Marcus moved swiftly towards the door, barring their progress. He had landed many times before, but now they were on the edge of an entirely different battlefield. He still had the skies, but those men were unpredictable predators. As they pushed through the cabin and out onto the tarmac, a wave of urgency surged. Their limbs almost felt heavy with adrenaline despite the velocity of their movements. They couldn't let Derek and Tyrell slip through their fingers. However, as Marcus and Chloe sprinted towards the Cessna, he caught sight of a black SUV speeding toward the strip, engines roaring as headlights illuminated their way. They had alerted others. The urgency escalated, a fresh wave of adrenaline coursing through him. "Chloe, we need to take off now, no matter the risk," Marcus yelled, urgency overtaking their moment of uncertainty as he seized her hand, drawing her toward the door of the plane. "It's now or never." "I'm on it," she replied, scrambling to ready the instruments as Marcus climbed into the cockpit, adrenaline-fueled urgency pushing him to maximize their chances of escape. She buckled into the co-pilot seat beside him, the tension coiling like a spring. Chloe's fingers danced over the controls as she called out the checks, quickly navigating through the emergency options. "Engines are primed," she shouted, her focus razor-sharp. "Let's get off this tarmac." The rumble of Derek's SUV and the approaching threat electrified the air. They were ready to fire, and Marcus felt the sharp winds gathering beneath the wings. "Brace for turbulence," he shouted, heart pounding as he pushed the throttle forward, propelling the plane down the strip, a mix of fear and exhilaration flooding his body. As they accelerated, the vibrations threatened to throw them off balance, yet Marcus gripped the yoke with determination. "Now, up," he commanded, the Cessna lifting into the sky, away from the chaos below. Behind them, the SUV screeched to a halt, Derek and Tyrell scrambling out, guns drawn, but it was too late. The plane broke free of the ground, carrying them into the open sky. "We did it!" Chloe shouted, her eyes bright with excitement and relief, but Marcus felt the storm still raging beneath the surface. They were airborne, but the fight wasn't over yet. He had reclaimed his plane, but Derek was still out there, and this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was personal. "Steady now," Marcus murmured to himself as he leveled off, glancing at Chloe, who remained a steadfast partner in their struggle. "We're not out of the woods yet." As they climbed higher into the azure skies, Marcus felt the gravity of what lay ahead pressing against his shoulders. He wouldn't just escape, he was going to take the fight back to them. As they climbed higher into the azure skies, Marcus felt the gravity of what lay ahead pressing against his shoulders. The Cessna citations surged through the atmosphere, an extension of his will. They weren't just escaping, this was a pursuit now, and he intended to turn the tables. "Where to?" Chloe asked, her gaze flitting between the dashboard and the outside world where the sun was dipping low, casting vibrant colors across the horizon. "First, we need to put distance between us and Derek," Marcus replied, his voice steady with determination. "Then we figure out the next move." He adjusted their heading, steering the aircraft toward the mountainous region that sprawled out before them. "If we head for the cliffs, we can lose them in the terrain." They might think they can tail us, but their vehicles won't fare well in these conditions. Chloe nodded, her focus unwavering as she monitored the instruments. And what if they call for backup? They'll have to catch up first, Marcus retorted, pushing the throttle forward and feeling the power of the engines respond beneath him. The plane cut through the clouds, leaving the chaos raging below. A moment of silence enveloped them, the hum of the engines becoming a comforting presence amid the chaos of the past few hours. But the relief was short-lived, as Marcus sensed something was still amiss. It was all too easy to breathe just yet. Derek would be relentless. He turned back to Chloe, who had her eyes locked on the radar. "Can you check for any nearby air traffic?" he asked. "We need allies, or at the very least a safe place to land and regroup." Chloe's fingers danced over the controls, her eyes narrowing with concentration. "There are a couple of small airstrips nearby, but I'm not seeing any commercial traffic on the radar. Just a few private planes that could be scattered." The radio crackled to life, a flash of static slicing through their thoughts. "Cessna citation, do you copy?" A voice echoed, authoritative but unfamiliar. Marcus and Chloe shared a glance, both sensing the potential danger. "This is Marcus Steele, pilot of Cessna Citation 117, he responded cautiously, angling closer to the MIC. "Who is this?" "Marcus, it's Mitch," came the reply, relief palpable in his tone. "Listen, I caught wind of Derek's men. They're mobilizing, hard. You need to get out of there. I can help." "Help how?" Marcus asked, skepticism edging his voice. "Last I checked, you were more of a grey market source than a lifesaver." "True, but I have some connections to local enforcement. They're not all corrupt. They're interested in what Derek's crew is smuggling. If I can get them a location." "And what if they tip him off?" Chloe interjected, voice steady as she eyed the radar. "We can't afford to play our hand too soon." "Not if you're already out of the air once they get gut instincts to track you," Mitch said, urgency sharpening his tone. "These aren't just criminals. They're organized, and they'll start digging into your history the second they've got a lock on you." Marcus nodded, piecing it together. "What do you suggest?" "First, land at the Eastwood airstrip. They don't have radar, it's remote. From there, I can connect you with an ally, someone who owes me a favor. You'll get the support to counter Derek. Trust me." Chloe leaned closer, her voice low and urgent. "We can't stay on the grid, Marcus. If we want any chance of catching Derek off guard, we have to be strategic." "More like guerrilla tactics," Marcus agreed, his determination hardening. "All right, Mitch, we're in." "Great. Get there quick. I'll do my best to delay them. I'll send someone to keep watch. Just be careful." Marcus ended the call, his heart thrumming against his ribs. "Eastwood it is. Hold on tight. We're going to make some sharp turns." They descended rapidly, picking their way through the rugged landscape, zigzagging between jagged cliffs and steep ridges. The altitude threatened to strain their course, but Marcus embraced the thrill of the chase. He was no longer the hunted but the hunter. As they neared the airstrip, the tension in the cabin grew heavier. "Get ready to pull out the chocks. I'll circle while you help me set down," Marcus instructed, focusing intently on his approach. "Setting us up for a quick exit," Chloe confirmed, her eyes tailing the edge of the strip like a hawk. "Make it count." The Eastwood airstrip came into view, overgrown and unkempt, yet still a welcome sight. Marcus could barely breathe as he prepared for a rough landing, memories of his confrontation with Derek boiling in the back of his mind. As the wheels touched down, they felt the rough gravel beneath, but Marcus held steady, guiding the plane to a gentle stop. Chloe flipped switches, allowing the engines to wind down while her eyes darted across the desolate area behind them, dark and still. "Out of the plane," she ordered, urgency flooding her voice. Marcus nodded, and both of them scrambled down the steps, quickly stowing gear and making sure everything was ready for a fast getaway. He could feel the weight of their actions pressing on him, the thrill of what they were doing exhilarating. "Grab the emergency kits," Marcus instructed. "If we need to hide, we'll need provisions." They both acted quickly but deliberately as the sound of footsteps began echoing, their sound sharp against the gravel. Derek had already picked up their trail. "Marcus!" Chloe called out, her voice tense as they secured the last supplies. "We need to find cover." "I see a thicket over there," he shouted back, leading the way as they plunged into the brush, the shadows swallowing them whole. They pressed back against the tree line, heartbeats resonating like drums in their ears. Breathing quietly, they listened intently as the footsteps grew louder, followed by the low murmur of Derek's crew. "Think they got away?" Tyrell's voice carried through the trees, tight with frustration. "They can't be too far. If we fan out, we'll find them," Derek replied, his voice cold as ice. Every hushed breath became a shared secret, each moment a risk that could tip in any direction. Derek's men moved with silent menace, and Marcus's insides knotted. He had fought against men like these before. They were ruthless, relentless, a dangerous breed that preyed on weakness. The group ventured deeper into the brush, their silhouettes barely visible against the dimming sky. Marcus felt a wave of urgency rise within him. He had to react. "We need a plan," Marcus murmured to Chloe, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can draw them out, create a distraction." "No," she replied, her voice firm but urgent. "It's too risky. We'll get overrun. We wait for the right moment, observe their movements. We can track them." He nodded, pushing his instinct to act down deeper within him. There was wisdom in patience, in precision, and Chloe always kept him in check. Together, they focused on keeping quiet, their hearts thrumming in sync as they huddled beneath the canopy of branches. Minutes crept by, every second taut as they kept watch. As Derek's crew spread out, Marcus saw a flicker of movement in the distance. Chloe stayed attuned to each shift, her eyes scanning their surroundings for signs. "Over there," Chloe whispered, nodding toward a gap in the trees where Derek's crew had split into two groups, one moving toward the airstrip's main entrance, the other drifting further into the woods, likely looking for them. "Let's track the first group," Marcus suggested. "If we can figure out how they operate, what they want, we'll find a weakness." Chloe agreed, and side by side, they maneuvered through the brush. But both of them understood the stakes. They were no longer just surviving. They were preparing to confront the boys who'd taken everything from them. As they crawled forward, a low rustling came from within the trees, carrying the echo of danger. They traded glances and slowly advanced. And then, just as suddenly as they'd begun, Marcus felt a crack beneath his foot, followed by a loud snap. "Go!" he hissed, adrenaline surging as the sound pierced through the wooded silence. They burst into action, hearts racing as they followed the path that led to Derek's crew. But just as they did, gunfire erupted behind them, scattering leaves like confetti in a sudden storm. They dove for cover as bullets whizzed past, the deafening noise ricocheting in their ears. "Move!" Marcus shouted, adrenaline igniting a raging fire inside him. They were caught, and there was no option left but to fight. He could feel Derek now, lurking in the shadows, every breath haunting him with resolve. They darted deeper into the woods, running as fast as they could while the chase unfolded behind them. In that precarious moment of fear and determination, Marcus knew one thing for sure. Either they would reclaim their futures or become a lost chapter in a dark story that wouldn't end well. The revelation hit him hard as they ducked behind a fallen log, catching their breath amidst the chaos. He wasn't going anywhere without a fight, and if Derek thought he could just waltz back in, he was going to learn the hard way what it meant to mess with Marcus Steele. "Stay close," Marcus said, energy crackling in the air around them. "We're not done yet." "Stay close," Marcus said, his energy crackling in the air around them. "We're not done yet." The percussive roar of gunfire echoed through the trees, a stark reminder that their adversary wouldn't rest until they were finished, until they were silenced. But Marcus knew that fear was his enemy's weapon. With Chloe at his side, he would turn that fear back upon them. He scanned the area, instincts kicking in, mind racing through strategies. "We have to outsmart them, use the landscape to our advantage. We know this terrain. They don't. They're used to the streets, the city, the open space." Chloe nodded, her expression focused. "We can set a trap. If we can lead them into a narrow pass, we can flank them from both sides." "Exactly," Marcus replied, grateful for the clarity of their plan. Even in chaos, they remained a solid unit. "We need them to follow us. If we move now, we can get ahead of Derek and set up a proper defensive position." They cautiously crept through the underbrush, avoiding the crunch of twigs beneath their feet, hearts pounding as they made their way toward the pass Marcus had identified, a narrow gap between two rugged rock faces that led deeper into the forest. As they navigated the twisting paths, Marcus could hear the faint shouts of Derek's crew, infuriated, desperate, and growing closer. "They're hot on our tails," he murmured. "They've split up. A couple of them will come this way looking for us." "Let's set up here," Chloe suggested, pushing against the rough bark of a tree, her eyes scanning the ground for low branches and loose rocks. "If we can get a good vantage point." "Perfect," he replied, brainstorming as they quickly constructed makeshift barricades with fallen debris, creating barriers to obscure their position. "Just a little further," Chloe urged, guiding him toward a spot where they could peer through the leaves, focusing in on their next move. As they secured their positions, the tension in the air was palpable. They positioned themselves, guns ready, breath silent as the rush of adrenaline coursed through their veins. Moments passed, heavy, charged with energy, as they waited in the stillness of the forest. Every rustle felt amplified, every distant shout a sign of impending confrontation. Then, they heard it, the snapping of twigs, voices growing closer, and the unmistakable sound of feet trampling through the foliage. "Stay low," Marcus whispered, glancing at Chloe. "When they come around this bend, we strike." They both steadied themselves, muscles coiled and ready, their senses heightened. Chloe's fingers gripped her weapon, her eyes gleaming with fierce determination. This was their moment to turn the tide. Finally, they came into view, two of Derek's men, scanning the area with malice in their eyes, stupid confidence masking their lack of awareness. "Move in closer," one of them said, adjusting his grip on his gun. "They can't have gone too far. Keep your eyes open." "No, wait," the other replied, motioning to a divot in the ground where Marcus and Chloe had hidden. "Something's off." Marcus barely dared to breathe as the men approached, their attention fixated on the pass. This was it. He could feel the charge in the air. "Now!" Marcus commanded, bursting forth from their hiding spot like a flash of lightning. Chloe was right beside him, and together they charged at the unsuspecting targets, catching them off guard. Surprise morphed into chaos as the men scrambled to react, but it was too late. Marcus tackled the nearest one, driving him to the ground, while Chloe ducked beneath the second man's wild swing, rising swiftly to deliver a swift kick to his torso. "Keep up the momentum," Marcus shouted, adrenaline blinding him to their danger. He wrestled his target to the dirt, grappling for control. Seeing the other was already regaining his footing, Chloe lunged forward, using a surprising athleticism to thrust her shoulder into him, bringing him crashing back into the underbrush. "Finish it," she shouted, urgency in her voice as she tossed Marcus a spare weapon she had retrieved from the pontoon bag they brought. With a solid grip on the gun, he spun back to face his opponent, who was scrambling to find his firearm. "Don't move," Marcus ordered, his voice a low growl as he trained the weapon on his opponent. The man froze, eyes wide with disbelief. "You think you can take us on? It's about numbers," he scoffed, a narrow smile creeping across his face despite the barrel of the gun that was aimed directly at him. "Maybe you shouldn't have underestimated us," Chloe interjected, stepping confidently next to Marcus, her own gun raised. "Or your prey." The man she had thrown down groaned from their encounter, but the two others were still out, somewhere. With a fierce glare, he grunted, weighing his options. "Derek isn't going to let you walk away," he warned, pushing against the ground slightly, his body tense, ready to spring forward. "He'll hunt you to the edge of the earth." "Then let him come," Marcus replied, resolute. "Because this is where you lose the game, and we take over." Chloe leveled her gun at the man's head, a steely edge to her gaze. They both knew the stakes. If they wanted to end this, they needed to strike hard and fast. The man hesitated, reading the determination etched on their faces, and finally, with a calculating glare, he dropped his gun to the ground. "You're a couple of idiots," he scoffed. "We're not the real threat. Derek's smarter than that." "Then tell us where he is," Marcus demanded, his tone compelling, as he stepped closer, his instincts lighting like fire at the hint of information, anything that might give them the upper hand. As the man's bravado began to fade, Chloe exchanged glances with Marcus. They needed to keep pushing him, stay in control. "Then you've got nothing to lose by talking," she said, her tone coaxing yet firm. "Why should I?" he sneered, though a trace of fear flickered in his eyes. "You're the ones cornered here. What choice do I have?" "You've already lost," Marcus said, adjusting his grip. "Now, do you want to make it easier on yourself or suffer for your stubbornness?" The threat was palpable, and it weighed heavily in the space between them. "Fine," the man relented, shoulders slumping. "But you best ensure I see the horizon again." Marcus nodded, ready to listen intently. "Talk." "Derek's regrouping with more men. He thinks you're still on the run, but is expecting you to come seeking revenge. He's slipping away, but he'll circle back, finish you, finish this." Do you know where he's headed? Chloe pressed, her voice a blade of steel, catching his gaze. Damn it, he replied, frustration evident. I overheard something about an old warehouse conversion near the marina. He plans to ship out tonight, load everything he's got. Marcus felt adrenaline surge through him once more, igniting a fire of determination. We've got to move. If we head out now, we might just have a shot at catching him off guard. Do you think you can just leave me here? The man said, a half-hearted defiance sparking in his voice. You can't trust me. No one's leaving you here, Chloe said. That's not how this works. You're coming with us until we can ensure this threat is neutralized. No way, he retorted, but they narrowed their eyes in tandem, exuding an air of authority that silenced any further protest. Your life's at stake just as much as ours, Marcus shot back. You're coming, one way or another. With a reluctant sigh, he dropped his chin. Fine. Just let me call my boys. If I can get them out, we might just turn the tide back in our favor. Call them, Marcus urged, readying himself for anything, but counting on the inkling of hope that swirled through him. This could be their chance, an opportunity to work together against a common enemy. While the man pulled out his phone, Marcus and Chloe exchanged quick, silent glances. They were in this together now, united against Derek's imminent threat. In that moment, with adrenaline thrumming through them, the landscape shifted gears, no longer about survival, but reclaiming control. The fight wasn't just ahead, it was present and urgent, and they would leverage every advantage they could get. As he watched their newfound ally relaying information, Marcus understood that he had to ensure not just his safety, but the safety of those he cared about. There would be no backing down now. Once their new ally hung up, Marcus felt the weight of impending confrontation pulling at him. We need to move, he said, gripping his weapon tightly. To the marina. They were ready, a united front against the chaos that loomed ahead, each step taking them closer to a battle that would determine their fates. Marcus would not let Derek win. He couldn't. This was their chance to reclaim everything he had fought for. And he would fight to the end.